What's going on, everyone? It's Mohammed, the host of Aware Alpha, and welcome to episode 94. I'm super excited. I'm super grateful for where life is right now, and I'm always grateful for all the listeners. It feels so good to have a platform where I'm able to share my ideas, my thoughts, and have amazing guests onto the podcast. And there's actually individuals that are listening to it. They're implementing the things that we talk about and actually start to do them in their lives. So for me, it's a pleasure. And today I'm super excited. We have another awesome guest onto the show. She goes by the name of Kelsey. She's a writer, she's a coach. She is just very magical. And I say that because everyone knows that how I find these guests. I go online and whoever I feel called to reach out, their content resonates with me. I connect with them and try to get them onto the podcast. So today we have Kelsey. Welcome to the Aware Alpha podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I love that the magical energy is how you found me, and that's the anchoring of where we're going to start today. It feels perfect.
Yes, there was no we didn't even know we were gonna do this. It just happened in the last, we literally actually almost didn't. So and then it just
True,
happened.
it's true.
And
Yeah.
one of the first questions that comes to my mind is it's radical self-love on Instagram, right?
Mhm.
Where did that come from? Like, why did you name your page that? I'm very
Yeah.
curious to know.
So, oh gosh, my Instagram, I think I started it in 2013.
Okay.
And in 2012, I'd gone through a pretty big rupture in my relational world.
Okay.
And when that rupture happened, and I was going through the layers and layers of trauma and wounding, what
Mm,
I got to was that the root of all of my relational stuff that was happening was connected to a lack of self love.
mm,
So, my inability to not only love myself, but really open and allow love to land
mm.
from other people.
Yeah.
And so for me, radical doesn't mean extreme in this
Hmm.
sense, in this context. It means the root of.
Yeah.
So the root of all love is literally rooted in you,
Yeah.
in yourself. Like
Mhm.
you become the kind of portal
Yeah.
for love to flow through you.
Yes.
And to be receptive to love, you've got to be receptive to it somewhere in your own system.
Hmm.
And, to be able to at least be kind and generous to
Mm.
yourself, I think is a really great skill set
Yeah.
for people to pick up along the way. And it's
Mm.
not something that we usually get trained in our
Mhm.
family systems or in our upbringing.
Yes.
So to me, like that's where it began. And then I just kind of wrote it out. I'm like, well, everyone knows me as radical self-love now, so I'm just going to
Mm.
keep it.
Nice.
And even though my work has evolved and
Yeah.
deepened and grown, um, it still feels true. It still
Nice.
feels true that the root of love is rooted in self.
Yes. No, that's awesome. And just to make sure the audience know, when you said relational, you're talking about relationships, right? Like
Mhm.
when you use the word relational, okay? Because I
Yeah.
noticed I've seen that on your name a lot, relational. So when you use the word relational, so is that the same as relationship?
Well, every relationship is relational, and you can be in a relationship and not be relational.
Mm.
So, like, there is a bit of a distinction there. Like, relational means that we are acting in a way that creates more understanding
Mm.
between me and the other person. I'm
Okay.
also relating to the other person in full acceptance of their humanity, full
Mm.
acceptance of the whole range of their human.
Mm.
And when we're not relational, we bump up against these places, and then we get reactive and we get protective, and that's when all of our protective mechanisms come out of the closet, and we act in ways that are not relational. We
Yeah.
act in ways that actually break down
Every-
connection instead of build it up.
That's amazing. I love the way you said that. So I'm curious actually, you in 2012, 2013 is when this happened. So what were you doing for work? Like what were you up to around the time? Like I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah. So I started my coaching practice in 2009,
Okay, okay.
and I was doing a lot of one-on-one coaching at that
Mhm.
point. And I was also working for a company called Awesomeness Fest. So they're, I guess, like under the umbrella of Mindvalley. So Mindvalley is this big publishing company in
Oh, yeah,
Malaysia.
yeah. Mhm.
And they do at this point in time, they did an annual event called Awesomeness Fest. And I
Mhm.
was on their sales team for that.
Mhm.
And I was also on their production team.
Nice.
So I did the interviews for the people who were coming to the event to make sure that
Mhm.
they were in alignment with
Yeah.
the frequency of the event
Mm.
and the intention of the event. And
Mm.
then I was also on the production team, so I helped produce the event when it was happening.
Yes.
So I was getting to weave in my coaching
Mm.
muscles in that role as well,
Yeah.
because when you have to have these conversations to assess whether or not someone's a fit for a
Mhm.
program, like you can go about it in a very clinical way where you're very cut off and you're not relational.
Yeah.
Or you can go in from a place of, let me find the thing that connects me to this
Mm.
person and
Yes.
see if there's always going to be a thread that
Mm.
connects. And then it's about assessing, like, is them being in this event
Yeah.
going to serve
Mm.
them where they're at, and is it going to serve the community? So I had to really turn on my discernment,
Mm.
because for some people they weren't quite ready, and
Mhm.
so to come into that event would have blown out their nervous system.
Yes.
And for those people, I would kind of keep them in my connection bubble, and I'd say
Mhm.
apply next year and ask for me.
Yes.
And so it was really great. I worked for them for 4 years,
Mm.
and there were people who I interviewed in year one who weren't quite ready, but
Mm.
by year two, three, four, they were.
Mm.
And then they would come to the event, and it actually, because they were ready, they had the capacity for it,
Mm.
was such a transformative experience for them. And that's really like how I do a lot of my work now. Like,
Mm.
it's not about like, oh, I need to make a lot of money and like I see everyone as a dollar bill. I'm like, is this container actually in service
Mm.
to where you are now and where you'd like to go? And if
Mm.
it isn't, I can recommend other facilitators, other programs, other people who
Mm.
actually will serve you where you're at. And that began, in 2011 when I was first starting to work for Mindvalley,
Mm.
along with my own coaching practice. And then I started building programs and facilitating in groups, which I love. Like there's
Mm.
just, and you know how you said, like, it's just so magical how we met. And it's
Yeah.
true. And like, that's how I feel about group work.
Mm.
There's something so magical about it,
Yes.
because every single person in the group has a piece of the puzzle,
Mhm.
and they're a key for everyone else in the program.
Mm.
They're all so important. They're all so significant. And
Mm.
usually when we come into a group program, we think the opposite of ourselves. We're like, oh, my presence here doesn't really make a difference. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, I can just hang out in the background and like
Mhm.
watch everyone. And it's when they finally have this realization that, like, oh my gosh, like my story, my experience helped to unlock someone else's. And the only thing I had to do was reveal myself
Mhm.
and show who I really am and allow
Yeah.
the truth of who I am to emerge through me. It's
Mhm.
it's so wonderful. It's so magical. And I'm literally obsessed with everything that I get to do every day. It's
That's
wonderful.
amazing. And you're right, it is definitely very therapeutic, I'd say, in a group setting, you know? It's
Mhm.
like there's so many reasons for it, right? First of all, letting others see you for who you are,
Yeah.
just on an energetic level, you're there, you guys are, like you said, pieces of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
And we're social animals by nature, so it's like it already feels good to just be
Mhm.
around. And then if you're going to like a group setting, like a retreat or whatever, most of the time it's like these people are also on the same wavelength as you,
Yeah.
are close to it, right? So it's like you right away connect with them. It's not like you gotta, get to know them
Right.
for no, it's like right away you guys already have some stuff in common that starts. So no, that's amazing. And when you started, what were you coaching like your clients on? Like what was your, I guess, your expertise, or what were you helping?
The most hilarious part about this is that I started with life coaching and then somehow quickly got into business coaching.
Mm.
And I think I had a lot to do with my social circle, and a lot of my friends had their own companies. So
Mm,
they were bringing me in to consult and to coach their teams.
mm,
And what I started to notice is no matter what the company was that I was going in to coach,
mm,
there was this common denominator of every single issue that they were up against was
mm.
a relational one,
Ah,
whether it was relational in the company
mm,
or it was something that was happening at home or in their social life that was
mm,
impacting what was happening within the company culture.
mm.
So when I started to weave this together, I'm like, this is all relational stuff. This is all relationship stuff. Maybe I should just like get on the train of relationship coaching and like just
Mhm.
bite the bullet and decide like that is what I'm going to label what
Yeah,
I do.
yeah.
And from that point on, it was relationships and self love because when I distilled it down
Mm,
in those company cultures, like that's what it came down to is
yeah.
a lack of positive self regard.
Mm,
And when we don't have positive self regard for ourselves, it is very difficult to maintain positive self regard for others. You
mm,
can do it for a while, but eventually your own shit catches up to you.
yeah.
And then it gets projected onto other people. So everything that is undigested relationally for us or
Mhm,
emotionally for us gets thrown on to the people that are closest to us, whether
mhm,
that's a colleague, whether that's a friend, whether that's a family member. And so to do what I call like clean up in aisle 5,
yeah.
where we go in and we clean up these places and we reattune the connection in those spaces,
Mm,
there's so many ways that that will impact someone's life. Like
mhm.
it'll impact your work life, it'll impact your family, it'll impact your friendships, like, it'll just impact your overall fulfillment and comfort in your own system,
Yeah.
in your own body.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's been like this windy road to
Mm.
like land here. What's been like 13 years.
That's amazing though.
Yeah,
You've been in the game for over a decade, which,
I have.
speaks volume about what you do. So that's amazing.
Thank you.
What's your background? Like, did you go to school for anything?
Mm.
Like, I'm curious to know.
I did. I went to school and I did my degree in sociology with a
Yeah.
concentration in gender, sexuality, and women's studies.
Okay.
And then I went into personal development like shortly after.
Mm.
And I did about 3 years of training with Landmark
Mm.
Education.
Okay.
And from there, I was like, I'm just going to study what I want to study
Mm.
and learn what I want to learn. Like, I was kind of done with the institutionalized learning.
Yes.
And so much of what I teach now, like, there are foundations of what I learned in my degree, for
Mhm.
sure. There always will be. But a lot of it has come through real life lived experience
Mm.
of, and like, this is part of my gift is like, I will go and fuck things up in my life first
Mm.
so that you can learn from
Yeah.
the mistakes that I
Yeah.
made. And
Mm.
hopefully you won't bumble as hard. Like, you're
Yeah.
still going to make mistakes. Like, you're
Mhm.
still going to, hit those roadblocks, but it might not be as like imploding as I've
Mhm.
had to do in my life.
Yeah.
And especially when we're talking about relationships, like that lands more because there's feeling, there's connection in someone's lived experience versus I read this in a textbook and I like logically and rationally understand, but
Mm.
like there's no connection
Yeah.
with that person and what they're experiencing. So a lot of what I teach now is like the byproduct of having gone to the depths
Mm.
and to the bottom
Mm.
multiple times, and like the bottom, just like there's another layer underneath it every single
Mhm.
time. I'm like, okay, here we are, like we're at another bottom and
Mhm.
we're going to find our way through. And if
Mm.
I can climb out and find my way through that, it becomes like a pathway for other people. They don't necessarily have to do the exact same thing I've done,
Mm.
but they at least know that they can do it. If
Yeah.
someone else before them has gone and done it,
Mhm.
they can do it too.
Exactly. No, so true.
Yeah. And when, as a facilitator, I think it's so important if we're going to be working with people on this level that we touch our own depth. Like
Mm,
we feel our own feelings. Like if I was not in approval of my full range of my emotion,
mm,
I couldn't hold space for yours
mm.
without demonizing parts of your experience
Yeah, very
or
true.
trying to get you out of it faster than what is true for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be able to sit with my own shadow, with my own darkness, with my own bottom
Mm,
means that I can hold that container
mm,
and not need to pull you out of it because I'm uncomfortable,
mm-hmm.
and just allow someone to find their way through
Mm,
and knowing that they're not going to be left to flail in infinitely. Like there's going to be someone there to
mhm,
walk with them, but
mhm.
I'm not taking people by the hand and pulling them out
Yeah.
of their down.
Mm-hmm.
Like they need to figure out, oh, I need to take one step. And
Mm,
then, oh, look, I'm here. My guide's right here. And then now my guide will walk with me through
mm,
this process. It's
yeah.
very different than how a lot of systems work, where like, oh, let's just extract you out of that. And like, that's uncomfortable. Like, let's
Mm-hmm.
just tie it up with a pretty bow. And like, let's not talk about that uncomfortable thing. Like, it's fine. Let's just slap a positivity bypass or a spiritual bypass on there,
Yeah.
and you're good. You're healed. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're shocked that these
It's normal.
cycles keep happening, right?
Yeah. No, it's so true. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious to hear what was one of your bottoms, meaning one of your stories that was
Mm,
one of those stories, one of those before and after moments of your life that has led you to where you are today.
yeah. Well, I mean, I can go back to the 2012 bottom.
Mm,
That was a pretty significant one for me,
mm,
where I was in a new relationship, and it's interesting, my intuition had been going off about
mm,
this person,
mm,
and I gaslit myself. I
mm,
stepped over my intuition. I
mm,
rationalized what I was feeling, and I just ignored my internal experience.
mm,
And then 6 months into that relationship, he decided to end it out of the blue.
mm,
And what happened is that I got so whacked by
mm.
that experience, even though, like, if you were logically to look at it, you're like, you were only together 6 months. Like, this is not matching up. But what had happened was when he left and did it in a way that was, not that kind, not that considerate. It was just very abrupt, like, I can't do this anymore. Bye.
Mm,
And like it dropped me down to this place where my trauma with my family got
mhm.
re-triggered,
Yeah.
and any relationship that I hadn't properly grieved also got triggered.
Mm,
So the emotion, like if you were looking from the outside in, you're like, wow, like she's feeling a lot
yeah.
for like this relationship. It doesn't totally match up. And
Yeah.
that was true, because all of this underbelly stuff that I hadn't touched yet was
Mm,
now disrupted in my
yeah.
system. And I was
Mm,
having to feel my way through that. So that was a pretty big bottom. And
mm,
then 6 months after that, or 3 months after that, we got back together.
mm.
And again, my body was like, excuse me, what are you doing? And I'm
Yeah.
like, it's fine.
Yeah.
And we were together for 3.5 years after
Mm.
that.
Oh, wow.
And during the course of our relationship, he was unfaithful multiple times, and it all came out a year before we officially like ended our relationship.
Mm,
So that was another bottom
mm,
of like looking at the betrayal wound from a very different angle than I'd ever been able to touch, which again tied it back to my family and my original wounds around betrayal with my mom and with my dad. And, it's like, oh God, now I really have to feel this stuff. So it's not only the betrayal in the relationship that I'm having to process, I'm also having to process like 13-year-old Kelsey's betrayal
mm,
with her mom, and the betrayal of the feminine, and like all of this stuff. And it was intense. And
mhm,
then I'm like, okay, finally coming back up for air about a year later. I'm like, okay, I'm like in the pocket, I'm in the groove. Like we're working through this in therapy, and then he ends the relationship the same way he ended it 4 years before.
Mm,
It's like, I can't do this, throws the keys on the table and leaves.
mm,
And then it turns out that he was already in another relationship with one of my colleagues.
mm,
And so like the bottoms just kept bottoming.
mm.
And so like a lot of my bottoms have to do with relationships, which makes
Yeah.
sense. I'm a relational teacher. Like if I don't have relational bottoms that I've navigated,
Mm,
how could I ever help someone navigate theirs?
exactly.
So like, those were like some of the big wackadoodles that had happened
Yeah,
in
yeah.
like the last decade. Those are like the biggest imprinting ones. And
Mhm.
interestingly enough, it happened with one person.
Mm,
And it would be easy to villainize him. It would be easy to demonize him.
mm,
And where I stand now, like all of the final bottom there happened in 2016. And so I've had a significant amount of time to process and heal and move through those layers. And now when I look back on it, I'm like, wow, like that was one of my biggest teachers.
mhm,
Like I would not be able to do the depth and richness of work that I do now if I had not navigated that entire situation.
mhm,
And I'm not suggesting that, oh, we need to be grateful for our trauma. Like,
mm,
but in some sense, like there is this underlying gratitude, not necessarily for the trauma,
mm,
but for the thing in me
mhm,
that was able to turn on and rise and emerge
mm,
through that experience.
mhm,
Because there's a lot of people listening who've likely been through something really traumatic or abusive, and like that can be a really jarring thing to hear from a facilitator. Like, you just need to be grateful for your abuse. Like, fuck
mm.
that. No, you don't.
Yeah.
But you can be grateful for the part of you that turns on, that fierce warrior part of you that
Mm,
turns on and gets you through what comes next.
yeah. The aware alpha in you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
No, that's amazing. I love that. It's also like, I've had a similar experience as well. And I'm grateful for that person as well, because they opened up that wound that
Yes.
I didn't even know was there. Right.
Mhm.
So I am very grateful for it because of that person introducing me to parts of myself that I didn't know were even there. Right.
Exactly.
So it's good to have that gratitude for sure.
Mhm.
Um, so it's interesting, like all this trauma, all this stuff like that, like it's all has to do with our original relationship, which was with mom and dad, right? Would
Mhm.
you agree?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like if we want to be, in a happy relationship, for a healthy relationship, all that stuff like that. But if we have never actually witnessed a healthy relationship, how are people supposed to, like, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Like, if I've never experienced a healthy relationship, and then, first of all, I believe like if a healthy relationship comes my way or a healthy person, I feel like I don't know at this point right now. Like I'm learning, but I feel like I'm like sometimes I feel like I might just look at that person like it's boring. Like I might,
Totally.
oh, this looks like all I want is chaos. Like that's all I know is
Give
chaos.
me the drama.
Give me drama. Like don't text back on time. Like like
Mhm.
let me,
Mhm.
and then like you meet somebody that like loves you and just gives you all the stuff and it's super healthy, but like you're like, nah, this person is just like too easy, you know
Mhm. Yeah.
and right now I'm in that stage in my life where I'm like, I wonder if I would mess up a good thing, where like I would be like, no, that thing is just not, it's not good, but it being a good thing, right? how do
Yeah.
you how do you feel like you get to a point where you're able to see a healthy, relationship and be like, this is good? Like,
Mhm.
is that something you can ever know, or is it like you just give it time with, like, how does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, part of how that happens is related to understanding what
Mm,
your relational blueprint is. So
mm,
you got to go back in time and you got to sketch it out for yourself. Be
mm,
like, this is what I learned about love, about relationships, about men, about women, about people
Mm.
from my first experience of relationship, because your parents or your family of origin, because it doesn't necessarily have to be your biological parents,
Mm.
because for some people they don't grow up with their biological parents,
Yeah.
but it's their family of origin. So whoever was imprinting the first experiences of relationship,
Mm.
mom and dad will always be somewhat of the imprint, because without them you wouldn't exist,
Yeah.
right? But then they might not be the core people that you learned relationship from.
Mm.
So I would highly recommend in this situation to go back in the first 10 years of your life and
Mhm.
just track, what did I learn about relationship from the primary people in
Mm.
my life?
Mhm.
What was the example that was set for me?
Mm.
And then you know what you're dealing with.
Mm.
You know that these are the associations that my subconscious is making
Mm.
about what it means to be in relationship.
Ah.
Most of us don't have an imprint of what it means to be in healthy relationship,
Yeah.
unless we are the outlier here and grew up in a family system that was really healthy and cohesive.
Mhm.
I'm not suggesting that those don't exist, but they
Yeah.
are very rare.
Yes.
And so when we know what we're dealing with, then we can, hire a mentor, read some books, like,
Mhm.
and kind of get an idea of what maybe healthier relating might be. And
Mm.
then we see, okay, where is like my imprint, my original imprint,
Mhm.
compared to this new imprint of
Mm.
what a healthy relationship is meant to be.
Yeah.
And then we can see all of the areas that might not totally like click,
Mm.
and then we start tending to those places.
Mm.
And that's where therapy is really fabulous.
Mm.
Certain coaches can help you do that as well.
Mm.
Reading books, listening to podcasts, and embodiment work is so key,
Mm.
because the imprint of these patterns
Mm.
lives in your body.
Yeah.
This is why if we could read a whole library of books
Mhm.
and have all of this knowledge up here,
Yeah.
but then we go into a relationship and we're still a snap show. Like
Mhm.
we are still like blowing things up and we're like,
Yeah.
I can't be relational. I can't let you get too close to me.
Yeah.
Right. And because that knowledge is up here, it's not embodied.
Mm.
And so a lot of somatic trauma work gets you into your body, so
Mm.
that whatever those imprints that are traumatic, that
Mm.
are stored in your cells,
Yeah.
can be released, can be opened, can be moved, so that there's space
Mm.
for something new to land in there.
Mm.
And so the more that we process
Mm.
our past and kind of make peace with it, in the sense of, can I just accept
Mm.
that that was the reality? I don't have to say that that was good or bad or right or wrong, but I have to be able to touch the acceptance piece of, that is what so.
Mm.
This is the reality of how I was imprinted.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily totally match with the true desire in my heart.
Mm.
Because likely the true desire in the heart is to have a healthy, cohesive relationship.
Mhm.
But then you have these two parts that are at war inside.
Mm.
And the part that is going to win is the part that has more practice time. We've
Mm.
had more practice running the patterns that are dysfunctional.
Mm.
That part is always going to dominate
Mm.
until we get into the body. We understand, okay, this is where we've come from. This
Mm.
is what we were imprinted with. And we slowly start to change those habits, those patterns.
Mm.
And that means moment to moment, you have to be aware. So let's say you have this awareness, you're like, okay, I know my imprint and I know I have this unconscious pull to
Mm.
chaos.
Yeah.
And when this new person comes in that is healthier,
Yeah.
I'm bored.
Mm.
So what would happen in that moment is that you'd have to track, like, oh, I'm having an experience of feeling bored. I'm feeling the impulse to inject some chaos in here so that it's familiar. Now that you've tracked what's happening in the moment, you have the ability to make a choice. Up until this point, when the behavior just runs automatically, you don't really have much choice in the matter. You're just being hijacked by it all the time. But now you're like, wait, I have a choice. I can definitely inject the chaos and run that pattern and like get that spike and like the crash, because there's like an emotional addiction there to the highs and lows. Right? Or what if I just tried to lean in just like a micro like inch like to the sensation of smoothness. Let me see if I can expand my capacity for smoothness just a little bit. And that might mean, can I sit with it for 30 seconds? Can I sit with what's rising when I'm here in the smoothness for 30 seconds? Then you might still like run the old pattern of injecting some chaos. And then each time like your capacity for the smoothness increases. As long as if you run the old pattern, you don't collapse into shame. If you collapse into shame, that does impact your ability to increase your capacity for the healthy relating. So what that would look like in terms of unshaming is just noticing, oh yeah, that makes total sense. It makes total sense that I just did that. That's the dominant muscle in my system. Of course I would do that. I'm not bad. I'm not wrong. That it's just an automatic impulse. And going forward, I'm going to make an intention actually to see how long I can stay conscious in the new way of being. And if I can stay there for 1 microsecond longer, I'm winning. And so like this part of the work is not sexy. This part of the work is really methodical. Yeah, it is work. And there's no like magic wand that's just going to be like, boop, bibbity bobbity boop, you're done. And now you are perfectly aligned for healthy relating. Like it takes something to get there. And this is why embodiment work is so helpful, because it helps you feel and get comfortable and attuned to sensation in your body. Because again, like those patterns are living in your body, and we're usually addicted to the sensations or the emotions that come with riding out these patterns. And I mean, I work with a lot of women who also have the same pattern of, you know, more of that pull to chaos. And like when they meet someone who is more healthy, they're like, ugh, boring, snooze fest. Like, no thanks. And there's also like an intelligence to that, because underneath like the boring is a desire for aliveness, is a desire for excitement. And there are ways to feed those needs that are healthy and in alignment with your relational dream as well. So a lot of the time, if I look at a client who has this pattern running, I ask them, like, what do you do for excitement, for aliveness in your life? And if there isn't many things that bring them alive or bring up excitement, one of the ways that we support the transformation of this pattern is by getting them to do more things that are just generally exciting and help nurture that underlying need for aliveness. So for me, like I just went and did a pottery class on Friday, and I was in my glory. Like I was so happy, and like I'm learning something new. So there's this excitement of, I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing. And like this could turn out to be a total disaster, but I'm into it. Like, let me see what happens. And there was an aliveness there because I was in the moment with my hands, with the pottery, with the classroom, with everyone else who was there. So it fed that excitement and that aliveness need. And then when that need is fed, I don't need to go and blow up my relationships because I'm feeding the truer thing underneath. Does that
Mm.
make sense?
Oh yeah, it makes total sense. That's amazing. I have, on a side note, when you mentioned pottery, where I live, they do have pottery classes.
Yeah.
I was actually considering it one day.
And here I am right on time with your little subconscious, like, you should do that thing.
You know, the question that comes to my mind is, why is it as we start to love ourselves,
Yeah.
right? The people that we're attracted to change. And
Yeah.
I've literally like witnessed this in the last 6 months, 12 months in my life.
Yeah.
I started to do, just give you some context, like I started to do, I guess, heal my childhood trauma in 2019. I started to meditate. I went to a 10-day silent meditation retreat, to just be calmer and happier. I came out of it, whole can of worms opened up, and I literally, next 6 7 months, I'm crying every day during my meditations. I started to seek for therapy, and in the last 2 3 years I've done, the shadow work, ego work, and inner child work, and I'm still doing that work. It never stops, right? But anyways, I've noticed in the last 6 months or so, where like literally, like, the partners, the women that I'm attracted to, like, it's just a big change, and not in, like, in the physical, they're all
Mhm.
amazing, beautiful human beings, but just in the type of people they are, like,
Mhm.
where I'm not attracted to chaos, pretty much in the best way to say it. I'm attracted to healthy people with boundaries, people who communicate their needs, people who communicate and talk and have conversations. So I'm curious, like, what happened here? Like, I was like, my the people
What
that
is
I
happening to me?
yeah, like, what is happening to me? It's sometimes I feel like I'm like, I just don't know what I want. But it's like, no, it has nothing to do with that. It's like I very clearly know what I want these days.
Yeah.
But I've seen that where, like, the more self-love I have for myself, the more, like, my attraction to the people that I was attracted before has changed, and I wonder, I'm like, what is really, like, what's happening? Is it just because I'm realizing that I can give myself this love, I don't actually need somebody else? Or is it,
Mm.
like, yeah, I don't
I
know.
mean, the simplest answer is that you're healing.
Mm.
And when we heal these parts that Gabor Mate talks about the hungry ghost a
Ooh,
lot in his
I love
work.
him.
And the parts that are unhealed are the hungry ghost parts within us.
Mm. Huh.
So those parts are always trying to get fed with
Mm.
what is familiar.
Ah.
So when those parts are trying to get fed by what's familiar, they are going to draw you to a certain type of person,
Mm-hmm.
certain type of person that subconsciously you know that you can play out all the drama with.
Yeah.
They're going to be a great teammate in that
Yeah.
regard. But
Mm-hmm.
as you heal, those places where the hungry ghosts used to live, they're getting fed
Ah.
and they're getting nourished by what they actually needed all along.
Mm.
And sometimes that is shadow work, sometimes that's inner child work, sometimes that's grieving for a year straight.
Mm.
Sometimes that's when you're in joy and you're laughing, and
Mm.
like there's all of these ways that we fill and nourish those parts that have just, I think of the hungry ghost as just an extremely malnourished part.
Yeah.
There's nothing bad about those parts. They're
Mm.
just extremely underfed.
Mm.
And when we start feeding them with nutrient dense food,
Mm.
for anyone listening, I just did air quotes because I
Yeah.
don't mean literal food, although
Yeah.
sometimes maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean this energetic, emotional food,
Mm.
psychological food. When we start to feed these places with what they need,
Mm.
all of a sudden the hungry ghost isn't hijacking you when you're out looking for a lady,
Mm.
and so it does actually change what we're attracted to. The more we heal, the the whole paradigm of what we find attractive transforms.
Yeah.
And it's very important that that happens, because it's a good way to track your progress, because
Mm.
as you probably know, with healing work sometimes it's really subtle,
Mm.
and there's not like this like end result that you're like, okay, I've made it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so sometimes we're like, am I really even changing? Like,
Yeah.
has anything even really happened here? Like, I'm doing all of this healing work and like I don't feel that different.
Yeah.
But then someone comes into your life who is like chaos, and you're like, no. And
Mm,
then this other person comes in and they're really rooted and grounded and open and available. And you're like, yes. And
mm,
in that moment, you can track how far you've come.
mm,
And it's really important that as we open, because that's what happens with healing, is that we start to open
mm.
wider.
Yeah.
So our hearts open, our minds open, our bodies open, all of this armor and protection that we've had starts to come off, and we're more available to ourselves, which means we are also more available to love someone else in their
Mm,
fullness.
mm,
And as someone who has done a lot of work on myself, I
mm.
am not interested in investing into someone who hasn't even begun that journey.
Yes.
Not because I don't think that they're worthy of love. Of course, I think they're worthy of love. But if I were to invest into a relationship like that, I do a huge disservice to the relational dream in my heart,
Mm,
because that person cannot meet me.
mm.
They have not opened enough in themselves
Yeah.
to be able to hold what the frequency of relationship that I'm operating at requires.
Mm,
And if I do that, like, it's a hungry ghost that's, you know, moving me in that direction.
yeah.
It's this part that is not quite integrated, that's like, okay, we're going to play this out so that you can see what's happening there,
Mm,
and you can start to feed that part with what it really needs.
mm.
And, you know, I like to think of relationships as like this beautiful evolution of getting to know who you are. Like, I'm not someone who's like, I need the one and I need to be with this one person for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
Sure, if that ends up happening,
Yeah.
cool, but like, I'm not attached to that idea. So
Mm,
it allows my relationships to have a bit more breathing room, in the sense of, when we've gone as far as we can go together,
mhm.
I'm okay ending the relationship.
Yeah.
I'm not going to force something to be drug out past its expiry date.
Yes.
And so there's been so many rich relational experiences that I've had in my 40 years on this planet,
Mm,
because I'm not super locked in and hooked to the idea of the one,
mm.
but instead there are many the ones. There's the one for right now.
Yeah.
There's the person who is most truly aligned for you
Mm,
right now.
yes.
And that will be the person that you are most attracted to, and they're reciprocal in their attraction to you.
Mm,
And you can meet in the middle and go on your relational adventure together.
yes.
But kind of coming back to your original question, like, it will, like, your healing will up level the
Mm,
people that you find attractive. And
mm,
if, even if you were to track like the people that you found attractive 10 years ago, and like the character qualities of them, just like, if you look at that and then you compare it to who you might be attracted to today,
yeah.
they're so different.
Mhm.
And that's what we want. We want that evolution throughout our lives,
Mm,
because it means that you are growing, it means that you're expanding, it means that you're opening. Where it would be problematic is if the people you found attractive 10 years ago are the same people that you find attractive now, and
mm,
they're the same people that you'll find attractive in 10, 20, 30 years from now.
mm.
That would be the quote unquote problem,
Yeah.
because it would mean that there's a stagnation there.
Yeah.
There's not an evolution, there's not a movement, there's not an opening into truer, deeper parts of who you are.
Yeah. No, that's so very true.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're
You
welcome.
mentioned prior to this conversation about, if I want, our original relationship was with mom and dad, and you said to do this exercise where you look at your first relationship, or
Yeah.
and then how do you do that? Like, so you're saying in a sense of where, like, I have a journal and I write down mom,
Mhm.
this is how I felt with mom. I didn't feel safe with her.
Yeah.
Dad, didn't trust them. I felt like he was never there for me. Cousin. So pretty much anybody between 0 to 10 years old that comes to my mind, or that had some
Sure.
kind of relationship like that, like write the name and then describe that relationship just to get an
Yeah.
that's the blueprint you're talking about.
Yeah. That's a great place to start. And you could also do a couple sentence stems
Mm.
once you've identified who those primary people are.
Mhm.
So, and they usually are adults. So anyone who's like your age or younger, you're probably not learning a lot about relationship from them, but you
Mm.
might be learning from their parents. You might
Yeah.
be learning from their siblings.
Mm.
So it's usually anyone who's older than you,
Okay.
because as we're kids, we're like looking up and we're absorbing everything around us. So any significant adult or young adults in that 10-year window.
Mm.
But I would just start with mom and dad to not overwhelm you.
Yeah.
Just start with those two first.
Mm.
And what I learned about relationships from mom is, and then just kind of free write. And you
Yeah.
can use that sentence stem and then do the same one for dad. What I
Mm.
learned about emotions from mom, from dad.
Yeah.
What I learned about intimacy from mom, from dad.
Mm.
What I learned about connection from mom, from dad. What
Mm.
I learned about um, making mistakes from from dad.
Mm.
And so we start to see, like, when we use those sentence stems, it, like, you'll start to see the connections happening right away. I'm sure they're already starting to
Yeah,
like
in my
ping.
head,
You're
I
like,
was just like,
oh, this makes sense.
yeah.
And in my foundations program, we have a whole module on the relational blueprint. So like there's an extensive amount of sentence stems that they go through to like hit it from every angle. But
Okay.
those ones that I just gave you are such a great place to begin. Like you will get a lot of insight just from those ones that I gave you alone. And
Mm.
once you see, like, oh, that's what I learned about love, and then we want to see, how have I adopted what I've witnessed from them.
Mm.
So usually our behavior is a merging of our two primary parents.
Yeah.
So I get a little bit of mom, I get a little bit of dad, and I can see like where I kind of close off and wall off like my mom used to. I
Mm.
can see the way that I close off and wall off the way that my dad used to. And
Mm.
it happens in different circumstances. This is what triggers it. Like,
Mm.
and so you can keep going down after you have that initial map. Think of it
Mm.
like a map. It's like a treasure map
Mm.
into all of like the golden places within you, because
Mm.
a lot of our behavior is just adopted. Like
Mhm.
we picked it up, and now as adults we get to go back and really assess, like, does that actually fit for me?
Mm.
Do I want to keep doing that?
Mm.
Is that the right and true thing for me and
Mm.
the relational dream in my heart that I hold?
Mm.
And if it isn't, because you'll also find stuff about your parents that is extraordinary.
Mm.
You will find qualities about them that are so wonderful and that you are also embodying.
Mm.
And when we find those, there's also this piece of the puzzle where we want to really honor that.
Yeah.
We want to honor them as
Mm.
well.
Mm.
So one of my teachers calls it footnoting. So when you find a part of your parent that you adopted that has really served you in
Mm.
your life, you footnote them. Like, I'm only able, and I'll give you an example. Like, my father started a business, and I was in my 20s when he did this, but it still imprinted me. My brain was still developing in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And to see him do this courageous thing of going after a dream that he had
Mm.
really inspired me.
Mm.
And that business ended up falling apart.
Mm.
And it also taught me that when things fall apart, you'll always find a way through.
Yeah.
Two very valuable lessons for me as
Mm.
an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Would I have stepped onto the path of entrepreneurship had it not been for my dad leading the way? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Mm-hmm.
I might have, I might
Yeah.
not have, but I would not have had this underlying knowing that even if things fall apart, we'll still find a way through. We can
Mm-hmm.
rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
And so I footnote him on that often.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I talk to him and it comes up in conversation, I reflect back to him like this whole empire thing that I've built in my business. I like there's a part of me that just knows that it wouldn't have even happened if it hadn't have been for you and the example that you led.
Mm-hmm.
And then with my mom, the way that she was so attuned to me and my brother emotionally when we were really little. Like my trauma happened with her in my adolescence, where there was like this switch that went off, and all of a sudden, this warm, connected woman was like this cold ice queen all of a sudden. It was very disorienting.
Yeah.
But when I was little, like she was the safe place to land.
Mm-hmm.
And so that safe place to land is now what I bring to all of my clients.
Mm-hmm.
And without her imprinting that for me, would I be able to do it to the degree that I do it now? I don't know. And so I get to footnote her. And so, like, because parents just get a lot of flack, like, we dump on them all the time, like, oh, all of my traumas from my parents,
Yeah.
and like that can be really disheartening,
Mm-hmm.
because parents are, for the most part, doing the best that they can with what they were imprinted with
Yeah.
and what resources were available to them. And this is a nice way to kind of balance those scales so that it's more palatable to
Mm-hmm.
look at those places that are more shadowy, that are toucher or like tougher to touch.
Yeah.
And they're not left with like, wow, I'm just a terrible person who fucked up my kid.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when we footnote, we kind of balance those scales of like, yeah, you did some things that fucked me up for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And you also did all of these things
Mm-hmm.
really well, that like I'm still a functional adult here. Like I
Yeah.
made it through the gauntlet of
Yeah.
childhood. Like I am here and
Mm-hmm.
I am thriving. I'm alive. Like the fact that I can even look at my trauma suggests, there's a lot of goodness in that family of origin to
Exactly.
be able to even have space or desire to look at this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it makes total sense. I love the way you word things. Um, you mentioned embodiment, right?
Mhm.
Embodiment work. What are some embodiment exercises that you would suggest for people to do that are doing this work?
So I'm trained in nonlinear movement. So that is always going to be my go-to
Okay.
invitation. And the basics of nonlinear movement are you practice on hands and knees,
Mm,
and you kind of scan your body of where you're feeling sensation in your
mm,
body, and you begin to move your body in the place where you're feeling most sensation. So let's
mm,
say right now I'm feeling sensation in my lower left back. So
mm,
I might start the movement in my lower left back and just like move it and track it. And as the sensation moves through my body, I let my body move with
mm.
the sensation. So it's very non-linear. You're not doing hand over here, hand over here, hand
Yeah,
over head. Like that's very linear.
yeah.
And so non-linear movement of just following the sensations in your body,
Mm,
very helpful.
okay.
I like to put on music and just move with the music, move with my body. That
Mm,
is one of the best ways that people can get into their body.
nice.
Another simple thing is to sit on a chair and notice, can you feel the ground beneath your feet?
So have your feet on the ground.
Have your feet on the ground,
Yeah.
and can you feel the ground beneath your feet?
Mm,
And if you can't, presence yourself so that you can.
yeah.
Then see if you can build up your awareness of my feet. I can feel the ground beneath my feet, and I can also feel the chair behind my calf.
Mm,
And then when you can feel both of those at the same time, can you feel the chair underneath your thighs and
mm,
your calves and your feet? And then eventually you move all the way up so that you can feel the chair on the back of your back, underneath your glutes,
Yeah.
underneath your hamstrings, your calves, and your feet.
Mm.
And so that brings people right back down into their body, because a lot of trauma will take people up and out of their body. So the dissociation is an up and out experience.
Huh.
And same with meditation. Meditation takes you up and out, which is great if you're like, okay, I want to like commune with the universe and the infinite intelligence. Fantastic. But we have to come back down and in. Otherwise, what we learn up here, we can't really manifest here on the earth plane, because we're not bringing it through back into the body. So if you do a meditation where you're up and out, that's great. Just ground yourself back into your body before you go about your day. So feel the ground beneath your butt, your feet. See if you can stay with the sensations of your body, of like being really in your body after you've done an up and out experience. Those are some really great ways to start with the embodiment. Like, it doesn't have to be this, convoluted, complex thing. Like, it really is quite simple. And I teach my embodiment method. It's called Embodied Alchemy, where we use nonlinear pathways. We also use alchemical archetypal patterns. So we will use an energy signature, so an expansion and contraction energy signature. So we'll get to move in those pathways and let your body explore expansion and contraction however it feels true to. And then we will turn on an archetypal pattern, which might be, let's say, the mother. Let's say we're working with the mother. So move as that archetype wants to move you. So if you were to move in a nurturing, nourishing way, how would you be moving? And so we like weave all of these together so that you're exploring your body in ways that you wouldn't just explore in your day to day. So by doing a methodology like that, you're getting practice of being in your body for at least 40 minutes in that practice. And then the more you come back to an embodiment practice, the more natural it's going to feel to be in your body. And the non-linear pathways are really helpful for trauma, because a lot of the reasons why people aren't in their bodies is because their bodies have experienced trauma. And it doesn't feel safe to be in the body. And so that's why we work with nonlinear movement and nonlinear pathways, because that can help unlock and clear and move the trauma that's stuck in your cells. So that it's not so scary to be in parts of our body. There might be parts of our body that we're like, I don't know if I could ever like feel safe in that area, but we might be able to find some safety in our feet. We might be able to find some safety in our hands or in our shoulders or in our neck. Like, and so we just want to build the capacity for safety so that wherever we need to go to heal and repair what had happened in that original trauma, we've got the capacity to do so. And that is very much a lot of body work. Like, we need to be in our body to do that. Otherwise, we can just re-traumatize ourselves.
No, thank you for sharing that. I do a lot of movement myself. I guess some call it ecstatic dancing, somatic movement, or but yeah, I do a lot of it, and it definitely is a great way to get into the body and just be truly present, right?
Totally. Even something like yoga is great. Yoga, Tai Chi, those are also great ways to practice your embodiment. So anything that allows you to be in your body and you're really present in your body. Ecstatic dance, like, you're not thinking when you're ecstatic dancing, like your body is taking over. Your body is moving in nonlinear pathways when you're ecstatic dancing. So there is the potential for a good amount of trauma release to happen in ecstatic dance. And so if you ever have like a big emotion that comes up when you're ecstatic dancing or after, it's important that you let that emotion run so that it completes the circuitry so that the trauma actually releases. We don't want to interrupt the circuit, because that's what happened with the original trauma, is
Mm,
that your body went to go process it both on a physical level and on an emotional level.
mm,
And then maybe the adults around us were like, stop crying or like,
mm,
stop moving. And it interrupts the natural impulse of the body because the
mm.
body actually knows what to do
Yeah,
to reset.
yeah.
But our brain, our mind interrupts that.
Mm,
So if you have, like, if the body starts shaking or if you start emoting, you want to let that run and
mm,
let it clear. And it won't last forever. Like, but once it's done, like once it's through, you're like, ooh, I just processed some trauma there.
mm.
Good job, me.
Yeah,
And then, you go about your day. You don't need to know specifically what got
yeah.
processed. You just need to know that there was some processing that just happened there. And
Mm,
now you will have more capacity to feel your body.
mm. That's amazing. You think, is it really possible to fully heal being single? Like, I feel like in a healthy dynamic, with a great person, it seems like or I guess from my experience, the trauma gets exposed faster when you're with someone. Where
Mm-hmm.
with myself, I can get all good and I'm like, I'm really healed now.
Yeah.
Like, I'm good. Life is good. And then all of a sudden you meet someone and like 3, 4 months into it, and you're like just a wreck again. You're like,
Yeah.
whoa, I thought like I was all good. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's easier to also heal in a relationship if the other person is also doing the work and they want to be like a
Sure.
supportive container, right?
Absolutely. And we have to remember that all of our wounding and all of our trauma is relational
Mm,
because everything happens in relationship as
mm,
human beings. Like your trauma is in relationship to someone else.
yeah. Huh.
And so there are certain elements of your healing that you can do alone.
Mm,
But then there are certain aspects of it that you can only access in relationship.
mm,
So we actually need both. We
yeah.
need those moments where we're like, yeah, I'm good, I'm ready, like
Mm,
sign me up. And then we're in relationship, we're like, fuck.
yeah.
Like, I really thought that I dealt with this. Like I
Yeah.
really thought that like I was through this. And what you're seeing is another layer of it
Yeah.
that you could only access in relationship.
Mm,
And there is something magical about romantic relationships. They take us into these places that we can't always access in other forms of relationships. So, like friendship, family, colleagues. It's different when you have that intimacy piece, when you have that sexual energy piece,
mm-hmm.
and it takes you into your chambers of secrets. It takes you into those places that you've really locked down and you didn't even know were locked down.
Yeah.
And it will help open those places. And as you said, like it's very important to select a partner who has the ability and the awareness to at least respect that process.
Mm,
Otherwise, you might get re traumatized.
mm,
When people have all of these fantasy ideas of relationship, like when you find the right person, it's like set it and forget it. And you should never have to work on your relationship and everything should be smooth and you should
yeah.
never have an issue. And those are some of the most dangerous people to be in
Mm,
relationship with.
mm,
Because when stuff opens, and it will, they will be the first to invalidate it, shut it down,
mm,
demonize it, um, just act in ways that do not support the healing,
mm,
but instead invite the deeper closure
mm,
around it.
yeah.
And we want someone who, still might get triggered,
Mm,
but they have enough self awareness and relational awareness
yeah.
to know what's happening and to
Mm-hmm.
know that this doesn't mean that we chose wrong or
Mm,
that we're terrible for each other. It just means we're touching something deep, we're
yeah.
touching something true. And the first person to become conscious in that moment is the person that leads.
Yes.
So there are times where, partner A is going to lead and then partner B leads. And then you're always doing this switch dance. It's the
Mm,
person who becomes aware of what's happening in the moment is the person that leads you through that
mm,
experience. And
mm,
ideally, you have two people who are able to catch that in their own awareness, and
Mm.
they're able to lead the relationship through at different times.
Mm.
And where it's problematic as well is if only one person is ever leading,
Mm.
and we can get like really whacked by like, this is how like the masculine is supposed to be, and this is how the feminine is supposed to be. And it just fucks us up in relationship because we're
Yeah.
like, but sometimes the masculine should not be leading,
Yeah.
and sometimes the feminine should not be leading.
Yeah.
And like, we really need to do it like on a case by case basis of like, who comes to consciousness first,
Mm-hmm.
who's aware of what is happening and refuses to like literally pour gas on the flames.
Yeah.
That's the person that's going to lead through in that situation.
Yeah.
But then you might have something that gets really disturbed and triggered in you, and your partner is the one who can stay conscious through that.
Yeah.
And your partner is the one that will lead you through that moment because it's not her trigger.
Yeah.
And so she doesn't feel the impulse to pour gasoline on the flames. Just like her triggers are often not your triggers. So then you can lead in those moments. So it becomes this beautiful dance between the two of like mutual leadership in the container, which I think is really important to highlight.
I feel like we could charge for this podcast. Like this is really good stuff right here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love doing these conversations because they are so rich, and it gives people like a pretty big taste of what it's like to come into the field and work with me.
Yes.
Like in my containers, this is where we go. These are the conversations we have, just, longer and extended periods of time. And we go into those places where we do the work and we do the embodiment and we do the emotional processing. We do the celebration, like we do all of it.
Yeah.
And so it's a nice snapshot. So I feel very honored to have had this conversation with you today.
No, thank you. I'm also feeling very honored. For like one of the questions that comes to my mind right now is like childhood trauma, and I feel like childhood trauma is like the base for everything. Like that's how I think. Like if you're dealing with childhood trauma, it's gonna show in your intimate relationships, right? That's what's happened for me, right?
Right.
So in your containers, like when you're working with people, how often is it that you are like it just goes back to childhood trauma, or where you're like that's the work that you're doing with them, healing their childhood trauma?
I mean, a lot of it, like, and for some people it's their childhood, for some people it's their adolescence, for some people it's their early adulthood. Because I kind of take the frame of anything that happens before your brain is fully developed, which is at the age of 25,
Okay.
sets you up to be imprinted. Like there are wounding moments that happen, and those like really kind of set your human.
Yeah.
So for me, I didn't have a lot of wounding in my childhood. My wounding happened primarily in my adolescence and then the transition into young adulthood.
Yeah.
So really from like 14 to 18 is where my trauma happened. So when I think of like childhood trauma, like it doesn't land for me because it's not true.
Yeah.
And so I don't push people to like excavate something that isn't there.
Yeah.
But if we look at it in this wider lens of like, well, where did you get whacked? Did you get whacked early in childhood? Did you get whacked in the womb? Like for some people, it's like womb trauma. They're still in utero.
Yeah.
For some people, it's their, when they're toddlers or when, they're 6 to 10 or adolescence or young adulthood. And so we look and see like, where is the wound? So really to me, it's more about like, we do a lot of wound work together, where if something does get triggered, we do want to find, well, we can, because sometimes the trauma response is so intense that we can't pinpoint where it happened. Like our mind literally won't let us go there. And if we just know thing happened that caused, this particular response, and now with that response going forward, we're going to identify that some will.
So Kelsey's internet shut off there for a minute. So if you didn't hear the last couple of parts there, we're just she's just gonna continue talking about what she was saying there. So thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thank you for being in full approval and acceptance of my internet that just decides to shut off sometimes.
No, it's all good.
So basically in my containers, we will go and find like where the imprint happened, and we'll do our best to track what phase of life it happened in, not necessarily needing to touch the exact experience, but even just having a framework of it was around this time that it happened. And then we do a lot of reparenting in those moments. So what did you need in that moment that you didn't receive that would have made all of the difference? And so there is an element of the work where for a moment I might step in and play the surrogate parent, where I will help them reparent and like reprogram the experience so that they still have to come up with what they actually needed. And then my job as a facilitator is to reflect that back to them so that they get what they need from, a stand-in. So like I'm a stand-in in that moment. And I also have to really watch this, because if we get into the habit of me being the surrogate parent, then it can take someone out of their power where they're just defaulting to me to reparent them versus, okay, I needed that reboot and now I can do this on my own, or I can, ask my partner for what I need more clearly and succinctly when I get triggered, because I know it's this younger part, because it's just a younger part. It's not necessarily the child, it could be the adolescent, it could be the young adult. It's just a younger part that didn't get what it needed. And so as adults, as a functional adult, as a wise functional adult, it is my job to give those younger parts of myself the things that they didn't get.
Yes.
And that's how we like restore those spaces on an emotional and psychological level. And then we work with the body to restore on a physical level.
Oh, I love that. Your containers, how long do you usually work with a client?
So my foundations program, so the Foundations of Relational Mastery, is minimum 13 months.
Okay.
So like I like to do long and deep work. That is my jam. I like smaller containers. I like to go really deep with people. And I really want to make sure that they are well taken care of. So I'm not someone who does like really flash quick stuff and then like see you never. We go on a journey together. So that program is 13 months. I have a new one that's coming up called Sugar and Spice. It's Embodied Boundaries Meets True Desire. That one's 6 months long.
Okay.
My minimum investment for a one-to-one client is 6 months.
Okay.
And then we have 9 and we have 12-month packages for that. And then I do an intro to my work, and those are 8 weeks long. So that's just the embodiment work. Where I'll lead them for 8 weeks and we'll pick a theme. Right now we're doing people pleasing. Okay. So I do a teaching transmission on people pleasing, and then I take them through a guided alchemical embodiment journey. And then we have a couple spots for coaching in there. So if there's questions or things that they want to work with, they can do that. So it's a little taste of what happens in the longer containers. But I'm a big fan of doing longer stuff so that people get kind of the lay of the land. And this work is slow work. Like, this isn't, like you said at some point in the conversation, like this is work that I will be doing for the rest of my life. And that's why like I like to really tap into that of like, you don't have to work with me for the rest of your life. I would not recommend that. That's not healthy.
Yeah.
But having like a longer period of time so that you can go slowly
Mm,
through these places that are really tender,
mm,
and that you can really get to know yourself in a way that when you come out of the container,
mm.
you're like, huh, I feel really anchored in myself.
Yeah.
And I really trust myself to navigate whatever life might throw my way.
Mm,
And we can only do that if we have an extended period of time together, where
mm,
like I get to know you, you get to know me, and you're playing with the methodologies, you're playing with the work, you're
mm.
embodying the work. You got to get it in your bones, you got to get it in your body
Mhm,
and create new habits
mhm.
relationally. And that just takes time.
Exactly.
So,
You
yeah,
can't rush this. You cannot rush
no, no, I would not recommend it.
it. No, I understand that. So I want to like be able to talk to you for a couple more hours, but
I
we're
know.
going to finish this off. The conversation was amazing. As we finish off the podcast here, first of all, please let everybody know where they can find you. I will include all those details in the podcast
Perfect.
section.
Yeah, so the best place to find me is Instagram.
Mm,
You're going to find me pretty active on there. And then I have all my links to my programs that are in my Instagram bio.
okay.
And I do have a set of self-study courses that are housed in the legendaryloveacademy.com. So you can go
Okay.
over there if you just want to do it kind of at your own pace
Yeah.
and without any like live tutelage.
Yeah.
And then if you want the live tutelage, I do that in my Creatrix Mystery School. So that is where we do the live programs, we do the live teachings. It's
Mhm.
all over there. You can find all of that in my bio on Instagram. I'll also send you the links so you can pop those in the show notes, and
Awesome. Sounds good.
easy, easy, easy.
Thank you so much. So
You're
yeah, I will
very
definitely
welcome.
include those. And yeah, lastly, I just want to say thank you so much, Kelsey, for your time.
You're
I'm sure
welcome.
everyone listening to this podcast will take something away from it that they can, start to practice and implement in their day-to-day life. So I
Mm.
definitely appreciate it. And
Mm.
namaste.
Namaste. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And as we finish off the podcast here, for all the listeners, my intentions are for you to truly not only listen to this podcast for entertainment purposes. I know me and Kelsey have really good voices, but I hope that you actually take something away from this. I hope that you get inspired to, take action on either healing yourself, healing your childhood trauma, understanding yourself better, learning to love yourself better, whatever it is that comes up for you during this session when you listen to this podcast. I truly hope that you do take action and do something with the information and not just listen to it. That way you truly make the most out of your time for listening to the podcast. And until next time, stay an aware alpha.